September 14th, 1822. 10:30 in the morning, Thomas Bilbie stood in the bell foundry at Chewstoke, Somerset, examining a newly cast tenor bell that weighed 847 pounds. The bronze had cooled for 72 hours. The casting was perfect, no cracks, no voids in the metal. But Bilbie had tuned this bell to a frequency that would make it incompatible with every other church bell in a 50-mile radius. He had done it deliberately. At 52 years old, with 34 years of bell founding experience and over 600 bells cast across Somerset, Wiltshire, and Gloucestershire, Bilbie had just created something that would puzzle musicians and historians for the next 2 centuries. This wasn't a mistake. This was a declaration of independence written in bronze and hammer strikes. The bell hung in the tower of St. Andrew's Church in Chewstoke, and when it rang on Sunday morning, it produced a fundamental tone of E-flat at 311 Hz. But the overtones, the harmonic frequencies that give a bell its character, followed a pattern that deviated from the standard British church bell profile by 8% in the hum tone and 12% in the tierce. The result was a bell that sounded foreign, almost continental, in a landscape where every other bell for miles around followed the traditional English tuning system established by the Whitechapel Bell Foundry in London. Somerset had always been different. The county stretched across 1,610 square miles of southwestern England, from the Bristol Channel coast down through the Mendip Hills and across the Somerset Levels, a vast expanse of wetland that flooded every winter and created natural barriers between villages. Before modern roads, these villages existed in practical isolation for months at a time. A journey of 12 miles could take an entire day during winter. Churches became not just religious centers, but acoustic landmarks. Bells didn't just call people to worship. They warned of danger, celebrated victories, marked deaths, and provided the only long-distance communication system available. The Bilbie family had operated bell foundries in Somerset since 1698. 3 generations, Edward, Thomas, and Edward Jr., cast bells in Chewstoke and later in Cullompton, Devon. They produced approximately 1,370 bells between 1698 and 1839. But unlike the major London foundries that served national markets and maintained strict tuning standards to ensure their bells could be mixed and matched across different church towers, the Bilbies served a local market. Their bells stayed in Somerset. And somewhere in the early 1800s, Thomas Bilbie made a decision that would define the acoustic character of an entire region. He began tuning his bells to a different scale. The standard English church bell, as defined by foundries like Whitechapel and John Taylor and Company, followed what bell historians call the true harmonic tuning profile. The fundamental tone, the note you hear most prominently, sits at a specific frequency. But a bell doesn't produce just one note. It produces a complex mixture of overtones. 5. Partials matter most. The hum tone at half the frequency of the fundamental, the prime or fundamental itself, the tierce at a minor third above the fundamental, the quint at a fifth above, and the nominal at an octave above. In a traditionally tuned English bell, these partials follow precise mathematical relationships. The hum tone sits exactly 1 octave below the fundamental. The tierce sits at a frequency ratio of 1.2 to the fundamental, the quint at 1.5, the nominal at 2.0. Thomas Bilbie's bells didn't follow these ratios. His tierce sat higher, sometimes at a ratio of 1.26 or even 1.28 to the fundamental. His hum tone often deviated. Time equals 250 milliseconds greater than by 6 to 10 cents from the expected frequency. The result was a bell that sounded brighter, more European, almost like the bells cast in the Low Countries or northern France. Stand in the churchyard at St. Andrew's in Chew Stoke when the bells ring, and you hear something that doesn't quite belong in England. The overtones clash slightly with your expectation. The chord the bells create together has a strange, unsettled quality, not unpleasant, but distinctly foreign. Why did Bilbie do this? No written records explain his reasoning. His foundry books list weights, dates, and clients. Time equals 350 milliseconds / greater than, but they don't discuss tuning philosophy. The answer might lie in the geography of Somerset itself. The county had strong trading connections with Europe through Bristol, just 8 miles north of Chew Stoke. Bristol was England's second-largest port in the 18th century, handling trade with France, Spain, and the Netherlands. European bell founders, particularly Dutch and Flemish casters, had developed their own tuning systems, different from the English standard. These bells had brighter tierces and more prominent hum tones. They created a different harmonic character. Thomas Bilbie might have heard these European bells. Time equals 300 milliseconds, greater than in Bristol's churches. The city had a cosmopolitan character, with French Huguenot refugees, Dutch merchants, and Spanish traders all maintaining their own religious communities. Bristol's churches contained bells cast by European founders or English founders imitating European styles. If Bilbie heard these bells and preferred their sound, he had the technical skill to replicate their tuning in his own foundry. But there's another possibility. The isolation of Somerset villages meant that bells from different foundries rarely mixed. In London or other major cities, church towers often contained bells from multiple founders, cast over centuries, and these bells needed to harmonize with each other. Standardization mattered. But in Somerset, if you were recasting an entire ring of bells for a village church, you could tune them however you wanted, as long as they harmonized with each other. There was no need to match the Whitechapel standard if your bells would never ring alongside Whitechapel bells. This created an opportunity for regional variation, and Thomas Bilbie wasn't the only Somerset founder who took advantage of it. The Purnell family cast bells in Bristol and surrounding areas from 1566 to 1693. Their surviving bells show similar deviations from the standard English profile. The Cockey family, operating in Frome from 1668 to 1729, produced bells with distinctly sharp tierces. Even the earlier Bilbie generation, Edward Bilbie Sr. in the late 1600s, showed signs of non-standard tuning, though his deviations were smaller than his grandson's. By 1830, Somerset had developed what could be called a regional bell-tuning dialect. Villages across the county contained bells that sounded noticeably different from the English standard. Chew Stoke, Clutton, Camely, Temple Cloud, Stowey, and dozens of other villages had Bilbie bells with bright European-style tierces. Frome had sharp-tiered Cockey bells. Bristol itself had a mixture of European imports and locally cast bells that imitated continental styles. Then the Industrial Revolution changed everything. The 19th century brought railways to Somerset. The Bristol and Exeter Railway opened in 1844, connecting previously isolated villages to national markets. The Great Western Railway extended branch lines across the county by the 1870s. Suddenly, Somerset wasn't isolated anymore. Bell founders from London, Loughborough, and other industrial centers could ship bells anywhere in the country. Local foundries couldn't compete with the scale and efficiency of industrialized belletica casting. The Bilbie foundry cast its last bell in 1839. Thomas Bilbie died in 1839 at age 69, and his son didn't continue the business. The Cockey foundry had already closed in 1729. The Purnells were long gone. By 1850, nearly all new bells installed in Somerset churches came from just a few major foundries: Whitechapel in London, John Taylor and Company. In Loughborough, and Mears and Steinbank, also in London. These bells followed the standardized English tuning profile, but the old Somerset bells remained. Churches don't replace bells frequently. A well-cast bronze bell can ring for 400 years or more. The Bilbie bells from the 1820s and 1830s still hung in their towers in the 1900s still rang with their strange bright tierces and unsettled hum tones, still sounded foreign in the English countryside. Most people didn't notice. Bell ringing is a demanding hobby that requires strength, timing, and years of practice. Ringers focused on the physical challenge of controlling a bell weighing 500 to 2,000 pounds, swinging through a complete circle at speeds up to 15 miles per hour, coordinating with 5 or 7 other ringers to produce complex patterns called methods. The subtle differences in overtone tuning didn't matter much for change ringing, the English tradition of ringing bells in, constantly shifting sequences rather than playing melodies. But occasionally someone noticed. In 1921, a bell tuning expert named Canon Arthur B. Simpson visited St. Andrew's Church in Chewstoke to assess the condition of the bells. The church needed repairs to the bell frame, and Simpson had been hired to determine whether the bells themselves needed attention. He spent 3 hours in the tower, striking each bell with a tuning hammer and listening to the overtones decay. Then he spent another hour in the churchyard, listening to the bells ring for Sunday service. His report, filed with the church council and later deposited in the Somerset archives, noted something unusual. The tenor bell exhibits characteristics inconsistent with standard English tuning practices. The tierce partial is elevated by approximately 26 cents relative to the expected frequency for a bell of this fundamental pitch. The hum tone similarly deviates by 8 cents sharp. These deviations are unlikely to result from age-related changes in the bell's vibration characteristics and instead suggest intentional tuning to a non-standard profile, possibly continental European in origin. Simpson had identified what Thomas Bilbie had created 99 years earlier, a bell tuned to a different musical system. The discovery didn't attract much attention in 1921. Time equals 450 milliseconds / Britain was recovering from World War I. Church bells had been silent during the war years. The government had forbidden ringing except to warn of invasion. The return of church bells to regular use was a relief, a return to normalcy. Nobody cared about overtone frequencies. But the observations sat in the archives, waiting. In 1974, a group of bell enthusiasts formed the Keltec Trust, dedicated to preserving historic bells. They began surveying bells across Britain, documenting founders, dates, weights, and musical characteristics. When they reached Somerset, they found something unexpected, a concentration of bells with unusual tuning profiles, primarily in the southern part of the county. Dr. William Butler, a physicist and bell ringer from Oxford, took a particular interest. In 1981, he published a paper in The Ringing World, the weekly newspaper for church bell ringers, titled The Somerset Sound, Regional Variation in 18th and 19th Century Bell Tuning. Butler had measured the overtone structures of 127 bells across Somerset using electronic tuning equipment. He found that 43 bells, 33% of his sample, showed significant deviations from the standard English profile. Nearly all of these bells were cast by local Somerset founders, particularly the Bilbie family. Butler proposed that Somerset had developed a regional tuning tradition, influenced by European practices and enabled by the geographic isolation of the county's villages. He compared overtone measurements from Somerset bells to bells cast in the Netherlands and found striking similarities. The bright tierces, the slightly sharp hum tones, these characteristics appeared in Dutch bells from the same period. The paper sparked debate. Some bell historians argued that the deviations resulted from poor casting technique, rather than intentional design. Bronze casting is difficult. Achieving precise overtone tuning requires controlling metal composition, bell shape, and cooling rates with extreme accuracy. Small errors in any of these factors can shift overtones by significant amounts. Perhaps the Bilbie bells just represented sloppy work. But Butler countered with statistical analysis. If the deviations were random errors, they should scatter in all directions. Some bells with sharp tierces, some with flat tierces, some with sharp hum tones, some with flat hum tones, all in unpredictable combinations. Instead, the Bilbie bells showed consistent patterns. Nearly all had sharp tierces. Most had slightly sharp hum tones. The deviations clustered in specific directions, suggesting intentional tuning choices rather than random errors. Moreover, Butler found bells from the early Bilbie period, 1700 to 1750, that showed smaller deviations, closer to the English standard. The drift toward European-style tuning appeared to increase over time, becoming most pronounced in Thomas Bilbie's work from 1810 to 1839. This suggested a deliberate evolution in the foundry's approach, not a consistent manufacturing defect. The debate continued through the 1980s and 1990s, but by then, the bells themselves were in danger. Bronze is valuable. During both World Wars, the British government had considered melting church bells for munitions production. The idea was rejected, but it highlighted the vulnerability of bells to economic pressures. In the 1980s, many churches faced declining congregations and mounting repair bills. Bell towers required expensive maintenance. Some churches, rather than pay for repairs, sold their bells for scrap. The Keltec Trust and other preservation groups worked to save bells with historical significance. They identified Bilbie bells as particularly important, not just as examples of Somerset craftsmanship, but as acoustic artifacts of a regional musical tradition. Several bells were removed from towers scheduled for demolition and placed in storage. Time equals 250 milliseconds, or relocated to churches that could maintain them. In 1997, the Central Council of Church Bell Ringers, the governing body for bell ringing in England, added unusual tuning characteristics to their criteria for protecting historic bells. This gave Somerset bells like those cast by the Bilbies formal recognition as culturally significant objects. But preservation wasn't enough for some people. They wanted to understand exactly what Thomas Bilbie had done and why. In 2003, Dr. George Dawson, a campanologist, a scholar of bells from the University of Exeter, began a comprehensive study of Somerset bell founding. He gained access to fragments of the Bilbie foundries records discovered in a farmhouse near Chewstoke during an estate sale. The papers were incomplete. Water damage had destroyed most of the technical notes, but they included invoices, correspondence with clients, and a partial inventory of bells cast between 1815 and 1835. One letter proved particularly revealing. Written in 1827 from Thomas Bilbie to the vicar of St. Nicholas Church in Radstock, Somerset, the letter discussed plans for recasting the church's ring of 6 bells. The vicar had apparently requested bells tuned to the London standard. Bilbie's response was polite but firm. Regarding your inquiry about London tuning, I must respectfully note that the bells of this county have their own character, suited to our landscape and tradition. The brightness of tone achieved through our methods carries further across the valleys and produces a livelier sound appropriate to country churches. While I can certainly cast to any profile you specify, I believe you will find greater satisfaction with bells that match the established sound of Somerset churches. The letter revealed that Bilbie was aware his tuning diverged from the London standard. He explicitly defended it as a regional characteristic. The phrase "carries further across the valleys" suggested he believed the brighter overtones had acoustic advantages in Somerset's hilly terrain. Was he right? Did the tuning actually affect how far bell sound traveled? Dawson collaborated with Dr. Lisa Hargreaves, an acoustic physicist at the University of Bath, to investigate. They used computer modeling to simulate how bells with different overtone structures project sound across varied terrain. The models suggested that bells with enhanced high-frequency content, brighter tierces, and more prominent upper partials do indeed maintain intelligibility over longer distances in hilly terrain, where sound reflects off slopes and creates complex interference patterns. The standard English tuning, optimized for flat urban environments, produced a rounder, warmer tone that blended smoothly. But in valleys with echoes and reflections, brighter overtones cut through the acoustic clutter. Thomas Bilbie might have been solving an engineering problem. His bells needed to function in a specific acoustic environment, the hills and valleys of Somerset, and he tuned them accordingly. The European influence might have been secondary, or perhaps European founders had already discovered the same solution for their own hilly regions. Today, approximately 180 Bilbie bells remain in use across Somerset and neighboring counties. The largest concentration is in the area around Chewstoke, the villages of Clutton. Temple Cloud, Camely, Bishop Sutton, and Stowey all have Bilbie bells in their towers. On a clear Sunday morning, you can stand on Dundry Hill, south of Bristol, and hear 5 different sets of Bilbie bells ringing from churches in the valleys below. The sound is distinctive, brighter and sharper than bells from other regions of England, with overtones that seem to cut through the morning air. The bells ring every week. Ringers still practice on Thursday evenings. The same bronze that Thomas Bilbie cast in 1822 still swings in its bearings, still produces its strange, bright overtones, still sounds almost foreign in the English countryside. The bells have outlasted their maker by 185 years. They've outlasted the village isolation that enabled their unique character. They've outlasted the local foundries and regional traditions, but they haven't outlasted curiosity. Researchers continue studying Somerset bells, documenting their characteristics, comparing them to European bells, debating the intentions of their makers. In 2019, the University of Bristol launched a digital archive project to create 3D scans and acoustic profiles of every historic bell in Somerset. The data will preserve not just the physical dimensions, but the exact sound characteristics, the overtone frequencies, decay, rates, and harmonic structures that make Somerset bells distinct. Thomas Bilbie died in 1839 and was buried in the churchyard at St. Andrew's, Chewstoke, 50 yards from the bell tower containing his work. His gravestone lists his occupation as bell founder and notes that he served the churches of Somerset for 34 years. It doesn't mention that he created an acoustic signature that would puzzle scholars for 2 centuries, or that his bells would still ring 186 years after his death. The gravestone sits in the shadow of the tower. Every Sunday at 9:45 in the morning, the bells ring for 15 minutes before morning service. The tenor bell to 847 pounds, cast September 1822. Time equals 300 milliseconds / fundamental pitch. E flat at 311 Hz, tierce sharp by 26 cents, swings through its cycle 32 times per minute, producing sound waves that travel across the valley at 767 miles per hour, reflecting off hillsides, reaching farms and cottages up to 3 miles away. The sound is bright, sharp, almost foreign. Distinctly Somerset. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives. Time equals 250 milliseconds greater than every single day. Stories about regional craftsmen who created acoustic signatures that lasted centuries. Real people, Real craftsmanship. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if you've heard Somerset church bells. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Thomas Bilbie doesn't disappear into silence. These craftsmen deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.